everyone, and welcome back to Conversations about Bookbinding. We're going to get into something today that's pretty interesting. We're calling this a deep dive into bonefolder care.
Ooh, bonefolder care.
Bonefolder care. And our content for Conversations about Bookbinding is curated by the honey badger binder himself, Edward Patrick Krantz, and we're really focusing in on this idea of oiling your bonefolder.
Oiling your bonefolder.
Oiling your bonefolder. And, maybe for some people that sounds a little dry, but I think we're going to find that it's not.
I think so too, yeah.
So maybe just to give us a little foundation for this conversation, can you tell us what is a bonefolder and why should we even care about it?
Yeah, so a bonefolder is a tool that's used in bookbinding, and it's made of bone, as you can guess, and it's used to help create crisp folds in paper.
Yeah.
So when you're folding paper, you really want those folds to be super sharp and super crisp.
Yeah, you don't want those rounded edges.
No.
So the bonefolder helps you get that really nice sharp crease.
Exactly, yeah, and it just gives you a really nice polished look.
I see.
So that's what a bonefolder is, and it's super important in bookbinding.
Yeah, it really is one of the most essential tools.
Yeah.
For sure. And so this idea of caring for it, I mean, it's not like a plant. So why do we need to care for a bonefolder?
Right. Well, bone is a natural material.
Mm-hmm.
And just like any natural material, it can dry out and become brittle over time, especially with repeated use.
Okay.
Like if you use it every day, it's going to dry out.
And so what happens when it dries out? Does it break? What happens to the bone?
Yeah, it can crack.
Okay.
It can get kind of rough. It's not going to work as well.
I see. So it won't be as smooth.
Yeah, it won't be as smooth. It might even snag the paper a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's just not going to work as well. And it might even break. And you don't want to break your bonefolder.
Right, and especially some of these bonefolders are really beautiful. You don't want to hurt your bonefolder.
No, you don't want to hurt it.
You want to keep it nice and healthy.
Keep it happy, keep it working.
For sure. So this brings us to this idea of oiling.
Yeah.
What's the point of oiling your bonefolder?
Well, oiling your bonefolder essentially acts as a conditioner, It replenishes the moisture, and it keeps that bonefolder flexible and strong, and that prevents it from cracking and ensures that it lasts a lifetime. Maybe even long enough to pass it down to another generation of bookbinders.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, so it's like a family heirloom?
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But beyond just, making sure the bonefolder lives a long and happy life, are there practical benefits in terms of how it functions when you oil it?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest benefits is that it just creates a much smoother surface, which is super important for effortless folding and burnishing.
Okay, and so the smoother surface, that helps to not snag the paper.
Yeah, exactly. And it also helps to prevent burnishing, which is that unintentional polishing that happens when you apply too much pressure,
So for our listeners who might not know, what is burnishing? What exactly is happening there?
So it's like when you polish wood furniture too hard and you leave a shiny spot.
Oh.
And it's undesirable sometimes, especially if you're working with delicate papers, So oiling really helps you maintain a lighter touch, you're minimizing burnishing, and it helps to preserve the beauty of your materials.
I see. Okay, so you don't want to press too hard and then it gets all shiny and messed up.
Exactly.
The oil helps to create a smoother surface that helps to prevent that.
Exactly.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is something that I thought was really interesting. Edward, in the Bookforge video that we're looking at today, he mentioned that there are so many different kinds of oils that bookbinders use.
It's true.
It's like a whole world of options. And in one of the sources, pasted text, it says, choosing an oil is like composing a symphony, each binder adding their own preferred notes. So it's like your own personal blend or something?
Yes. There's no right or wrong. It's really all about finding what works best for you and your bonefolder.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So let's talk about some of these different oils. Mineral oil seems to be the most popular, especially for beginners. What's so great about mineral oil?
Mineral oil it's great, it's easy to find, it's affordable, and it does an excellent job of penetrating that bone to prevent any dryness.
Okay.
So it's a really good starting point for anyone who's new to this whole oiling their bone folders.
Yeah, if you're not sure where to start, mineral oil.
Mineral oil.
Okay. Now, what about beeswax? I've heard people talk about using beeswax.
Yeah, beeswax is really nice. It adds a little bit of luxury, I think.
Okay.
It has a warm fragrance.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it gives a subtle sheen to the bone. And it offers a little bit more grip than mineral oil.
Oh, I see.
Which some binders really like, yeah.
So you can really control it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then there's walnut oil. Edward actually uses walnut oil in the video.
Sure.
What's the appeal of walnut oil?
Walnut oil is known for its silky, smooth finish, and I think it's especially great for people who work with really delicate papers.
And it's just a little bit different than mineral oil. little something special.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a natural oil, right?
Yes, it comes from nature. So
Yeah.
there's that nice connection to the natural world.
It's like you're bringing the forest into your bindery.
Yes.
I like that. Now, for the eco-conscious bookbinder out there, we've got jojoba oil. Why is jojoba oil a good, sustainable choice?
So jojoba oil is really cool because it closely resembles the sebum that our skin naturally produces.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so it nourishes the bone without leaving a greasy residue.
Okay.
So it's a really clean, sustainable option.
It's like giving your Bonefolder a drink of its own natural oils. I love that. So, okay, we got all these oils in front of us like a big buffet.
Yes.
How do we actually apply this magic elixir? Like, what's the process?
Well, it's pretty simple, actually.
Right,
but
yeah.
there are a few key steps that will ensure that you're doing it properly.
Okay.
Pasted text and Edward's video both really stress that you need to start with a clean bone folder. Okay, so before we even think about oil,
Yes.
we're giving you the good wipe down.
Exactly, yeah. Make sure there's no dust, no debris, no adhesive residue.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And then once it's nice and clean,
Then it's time for the anointing.
the anointing.
And this is where less is more.
Okay, tell me more about this anointing process.
Okay, so you only need a really tiny amount of oil, like a drop or two.
Oh, wow. So just a tiny bit.
Just a tiny bit. Because if you use too much, it can actually make the bone folder slippery, and then it's hard to handle.
Okay.
And you can apply it directly to the bone folder, or you can use a lint-free cloth to kind of spread it around evenly.
I see.
Some people like to use a dedicated brush, almost like a tiny paintbrush,
Oh, wow.
for a very precise application.
So it's almost like a very mindful process, you know?
Yes.
You're not just like slathering on oil. You're really like carefully, intentionally nourishing the bone.
Yes. It's all about taking the time to care for your tools, you're appreciating them, and the role they play in your work. And then once you've applied the oil, you want to buff the bone folder with a clean, dry cloth
Okay.
to get rid of any excess oil.
So you really like polishing it up.
Yes, you're giving it a nice little polish, yeah.
So it's like a mini spa treatment.
Yes.
Cleanse, moisturize, polish. Now, how often should we be doing this oiling? Does it depend on like how much you use your bone folder?
It does, and there's no hard and fast rule, which I think is interesting. It really comes down to just paying attention to your bone folder's needs. If you use it every day, it might need like a weekly oiling.
Okay.
And then if you don't use it very often, it might only need oiling like once a month.
So you kind of have to like be in tune with your tool
Yes.
and just recognize like, when is it thirsty for a little oil refreshment?
Exactly. Yeah, your bone folder will tell you.
It'll tell you. Okay, I love that.
If it starts to feel dry or rough,
Yeah.
then you know it's time for another oil treatment.
Okay. Now, this is a question I think a lot of people have, especially when they're new to oiling. Is there any risk that the oil from the bone folder is going to transfer onto the paper?
That's a good question, and it's a valid concern, and actually Edward addresses that directly in the Bookforge video. He talks about the study that specifically looked at this issue.
Oh, interesting.
And what they found was really surprising. They didn't find any detectable transfer of oil from a properly oiled bone folder. But what they did find was that there were traces of oil from the paper-making process.
Wow.
Yeah, and from human touch.
What? Our hands have oil on them.
Yes, we have natural oils on our skin.
So that can get on the paper even if we're not oiling our bone folders.
Exactly.
That is so interesting.
Yeah, and so it just shows that, oil transfer is something to be mindful of in general. Clean hands and tools are really important no matter what.
I see. So it's not just about the bone folder oil. It's like we're leaving our mark on everything we touch.
Yes.
Our oil prints, you could say.
I like that, oil prints.
Okay. And speaking of leaving our mark, Edward brought up something else in the video that totally blew my mind. Apparently, traditional bookbinders used to use the oil from their forehead and nose to oil their bone folder.
No, I know it sounds crazy.
Wait, are you serious?
Yeah.
Like they would just like dab their face and then rub it on the bone folder.
That's what it sounds like.
That's incredible.
But it makes sense because they had to use what was available to them.
Yeah.
And it worked.
It's such a vivid image. I could just picture them like pausing their work to dab a little oil from their face onto their bone folder. It's like such a hands-on approach.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So we've talked about how to oil a single bone folder. But what if you have like a whole collection of these trusty tools? Does Edward have any tips for oiling multiple bone folders at once?
He does.
Okay.
In the video, he shows how he uses a container filled with oil, and he just puts the bone folders right in there and lets them soak for like 24 to 72 hours.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that way they all get a nice, thorough oiling.
That sounds really efficient.
It is.
Any other tips he shares?
He emphasizes that it's really important to wash the bone folders thoroughly with soap and water after they've soaked.
Okay.
That gets rid of any excess oil. And then he even suggests letting them air dry for a day or two just to be extra safe.
So it's a multi-day spa retreat for your bone folders.
It is.
That's awesome. Now, he also mentioned an alternative method from Annie Wilcox's book, right?
She does, yeah.
What's her technique?
So she suggests wrapping the bone folder in a rag that's been saturated with oil,
Okay.
and then you put it in a Ziploc bag. And so it uses less oil. It's super easy to do.
I see. So you got options.
Yes.
It's like choosing your favorite ice cream flavor, something for everyone. But before we get too carried away with all these different oiling techniques, I think it's important to remember that oiling is just one part of caring for your bone folder.
That's a good point.
Proper storage and cleaning are equally important.
Yes, they are.
So what are some key tips for storing bone folders? I imagine we want to keep them away from extreme temperatures and moisture.
You got it.
Okay.
So ideally, you want to store them in a cool, dry place away from direct sunlight. Like a dedicated drawer or box is great.
Oh, okay. So like their own little special spot.
Yeah, their own little bone folder sanctuary.
I love that.
Where they can rest and recharge. And you don't want them like crammed together or rubbing up against other tools because that can scratch or damage the surface.
Oh, okay.
You got to be gentle with them.
Yeah, treat them with respect.
Exactly.
Okay, and what about cleaning? Like how do we keep our bone folders free of dirt and grime and all the glue and stuff that gets on them?
So regular cleaning is key, even if you're not oiling.
Okay.
Edward recommends using a mild soap and water to gently wash the bone folder.
Okay, so nothing too harsh.
No, nothing too harsh. You want to be gentle with them.
Okay.
And just get rid of any dirt or glue or any kind of oil residue.
Okay.
But yeah, no harsh chemicals or like abrasive scrubbers.
No steel wool.
No steel wool, no.
Okay. This whole conversation is making me think about how caring for our bone folders is about more than just practicality. It's about appreciating the tools that allow us to do our craft.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Like an act of respect.
It is, yeah. It's a reminder to slow down and pay attention to the details and to honor those traditions that have been passed down through generations of bookbinders.
That's beautiful. And it makes me even more curious to learn more about all the different aspects of bone folder care. So let's take a moment to gather our thoughts, and when we come back, we'll dive deeper into Edward's insights on how caring for our bone folders can actually elevate our craft.
Sounds good. Welcome back, everyone. Before the break, we were talking about this connection to the past and, how caring for our bone folders is kind of like a link to all the bookbinders who came before us.
It's a powerful thought, for sure. And Edward really emphasizes in the Book Forge video that cleaning your bone folder is just as important as oiling it.
Absolutely. Even if you're oiling it regularly, using it every day can lead to buildup.
Yeah.
Dirt, adhesive, even oils from our hands, all that stuff can affect how well your bone folder works.
He specifically recommends washing them really well with soap and water after soaking them in oil.
Right, yeah. That gets rid of all the excess oil and it makes sure that the oil doesn't transfer to your projects.
And he even says to let them sit for a day after washing just to make sure they're completely dry before you use them. I'll admit I've been guilty of skipping that step.
It's easy to get excited and just want to jump back into your project.
It is.
But, patience is key, especially in bookbinding.
That's so true. This whole conversation is making me think about something else that Edward said in the video, about how some of this traditional knowledge is being lost.
He mentioned that there aren't as many master bookbinders passing down their knowledge to apprentices these days.
Right, and that makes his research and his dedication to sharing this information even more important.
I agree. It's so crucial to, keep a record of these practices, even the simple stuff.
Yeah.
So that it doesn't disappear.
Exactly, and that's what we're trying to do here on Conversations.
Bookbinding.
We're having these conversations and exploring all these different aspects of the craft and learning from each other.
Yes, it's a community effort. It's wonderful to think that someone who's brand new to bookbinding could be listening right now.
Yeah.
And picking up these tips that will help them along the way.
It's amazing how even something like oiling a bone folder can spark such a great conversation, right?
It really is. There's so much depth to bookbinding.
Yeah.
And it's often the little details that have the biggest impact.
It reminds me of that saying, the devil is in the details.
Uh-huh.
But I think in bookbinding, it's more like the beauty is in the details.
I love that. And bookbinding is this wonderful mix of tradition and innovation.
Yeah.
So we can learn from the bookbinders who came before us, but we can also embrace new tools and materials and techniques.
And through it all, the Bonefolder's always there.
It is.
Our trusty companion. It helps us turn ideas into physical objects.
Yes.
It really is a special tool.
It is. It really is.
Let's get back to some of the wisdom that Edward shared in the video.
Yeah.
He's pretty specific about what kind of oil to use to season bonefolders.
He is, yeah. He mentions walnut oil, groundnut oil, and linseed oil.
And he emphasizes that it doesn't have to be expensive.
No, not at all. Just as long as it's pure, good quality.
The point is to nourish and protect the bone.
Right.
Not to add anything that could damage it or get on the paper.
Exactly.
He also points out that the type of oil you use can affect the color of the bonefolder. Have you noticed that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. But walnut oil in particular.
Yeah.
It tends to give the bone a warm amber color.
Oh, wow.
Which a lot of bookbinders actually really like.
It's like it gets its own patina.
Yeah.
From being well loved. Speaking of color, Edward addresses a concern that I know a lot of people have, whether the oil will darken the paper, especially people who work with light-colored papers.
Yeah.
So what does he say about that?
He says not to worry. A properly oiled bonefolder won't transfer oil to the paper.
Okay.
He brings up that study again, the one that found no evidence of oil transfer.
Yeah.
But it's always a good idea to, wash your bonefolders thoroughly, let them dry completely.
And like we said before, it's always good practice to keep your hands and your work surface clean, too.
Absolutely. Every little detail matters.
It really does. Speaking of cleanliness, Edward also emphasizes that it's important to clean your bonefolders regularly, even when you're not oiling them.
He does, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, even without oiling them, the oils from your hands can still get on them.
Right, okay.
And so he recommends using mild soap and water, the same as after you oil them, just to remove any dirt or glue.
So, again, no harsh chemicals.
No, be gentle.
It really all comes back to that idea of ritual and respect that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's about appreciating the tools that we use.
It's a way of honoring the bookbinders who came before us.
It really is. It's a beautiful way of connecting with the history of bookbinding. So let's shift our focus to the specific benefits Edward highlights when it comes to how oiling affects the bonefolder itself.
Okay, so he talks about how regular oiling makes them less brittle.
Oh, okay.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah, when bones dry, it's more likely to crack or break.
Yeah.
So oiling, it helps to keep it strong.
Exactly. And he also mentions that oiling actually closes up the pores of the bone, making it smoother and easier to clean.
That's important, right? Because a bonefolder that's really porous could absorb dirt and glue.
Exactly. So by sealing those pores, oiling helps to protect the bone.
So it's like giving your bonefolder a little shield to keep it clean and strong and in good shape.
Exactly. And then it just glides over the paper more smoothly, and the whole process becomes more enjoyable.
It creates that sense of harmony between the tool and the material and the maker.
Yes, it does.
And that's really at the heart of bookbinding.
It is.
It's that blend of artistry and skill and tradition.
And caring for our tools is an essential part of honoring that tradition.
It is, and it makes sure that we can keep creating beautiful books for years to come.
Yes, and pass on this knowledge to future bookbinders.
I love that. As we explore the world of bonefolder care even more, I think it's important to remember that each bookbinder develops their own unique relationship with their tools.
That's so true.
So there's no one right way to do things.
Right.
Experiment, Find what works best for you.
Exactly.
And honor that personal connection. Now, curious, what about you? What are some of the things you've learned along the way? What tips have you picked up?
Oh, that's a really good question. My journey with bonefolder care has been a lot like my bookbinding journey, full of experimentation and just kind of learning as I go.
I like that.
And a growing appreciation for those little details,
When I first started bookbinding, I was so focused on learning the techniques and the different stitches and getting those folds just right. I kind of took the bonefolder for granted.
I think a lot of people do. They get so excited about, the projects, they forget about the basics.
Exactly. And then I stumbled across this forum discussion about oiling bonefolders. And it was like a light bulb moment. I was like, wait, I should be caring for this tool.
Yeah. It can make such a difference.
It really can. Once I started oiling it, the bonefolder felt smoother, it glided better, my folds looked crisper and cleaner.
It's amazing how those little things can have such a big impact.
It's true. And beyond like the practical benefits, I found that the act of oiling my bone folder became almost meditative,
I can see that.
like a way to connect with a tool and really appreciate what it does for me, you know?
Yeah, it's about being mindful, being present in the moment.
Exactly. Speaking of mindfulness, I have to tell you about this little experiment I tried recently. I know it sounds a little crazy, but...
Oh, I love a good experiment.
Okay, so I was oiling a bone folder using Edwards' container method, and I had this thought. What if I added essential oil to the mix?
Interesting.
So I put a few drops of lavender essential oil into the mineral oil.
Oh, wow.
And the aroma while I was oiling the bone folders was incredible. It turned the whole process into this, like, sensory experience.
I love that. It's so creative. And, it speaks to the idea that there's no one right way to care for your tools.
Yeah.
It's all about finding what works for you.
And it reminds me of something else Edward said in the video about how sharing our knowledge helps to keep these traditions alive.
Yeah, it's so important to talk about these things, to experiment, to share what we discover.
Otherwise, they might be lost.
Yeah.
And it all comes back to that sense of connection, right?
It does.
Connection to our tools, connection to the bookbinding community.
Connection to the history of this beautiful craft.
Yeah, it's really amazing. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the ritual of oiling, what's one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I think the most important thing is to approach bone folder care with a sense of intention and appreciation. It's not just about following a set of rules.
Yeah.
It's about, understanding your tools, what they need.
And finding joy in the process.
Yes, exactly.
And remember, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Just experiment, try different things, and find what works for you.
And share your discoveries. Let's learn from each other.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, whether you're a seasoned bookbinder or just starting out, we encourage you to embrace the ritual of oiling. Connect with your tools and find joy in caring for the objects that help you create.
A well-loved bone folder is a happy bone folder.
And a happy bone folder makes a happy bookbinder.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of bone folder care. Until next time, happy binding.